Charles, how are you? It's in a special out-of-town edition.
Or bi-coastal, city of my birth, city of my residence.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to have you here, Charles. Thanks for joining me via Skype today. As always, you've prepared a litany of information that's going to take people through the latest of your findings in terms of the Clintons' wrongdoings. It's been a busy week.
Yeah, I don't know what just happened, Jason, but I've got to do something on my phone here.
No problem.
There we go. So the automatic notification of Sunday with Charles just screwed up the image. Anyway,
sorry about that.
That's all right. So the art department, I mean, I don't know how many thousand people you have in this art department, and I shudder to think what it's costing you, but another triumph.
Well, thank you. It's a low budget, one-man operation running the art department there, but I do try to keep it lively for you. I know you enjoy the various internet memes we've created surrounding the Clinton Foundation and their felonious activities. It's staggering, Charles. I saw a great segment that you did on the Hagman and Hagman show. And I mean, I know you've been on there many times, you've been on Lionel many times, but it's amazing for me to watch how the hosts of these programs and me are constantly amazed by just the list that keeps growing of criminal activity on the part of the Clinton Foundation and their associates around the world.
Yeah, the thing I noticed about it in the very beginning is that there's so many strands to it, and it almost overwhelmed my understanding. But
yeah,
the right way to get into this, I think, is to take it apart piece by piece. And if you understand each strand, then over time you grow to understand the whole thing. And fortunately, thanks to the great work that you've been doing here, helping us get this out to the public, more and more people around the world, I know this because they're now contacting me, more and more people around the world and various prosecutors at federal and other levels, they're getting this and they're watching this. So in the beginning of the show, I'd like to start by welcoming all of you. I hope you have your pads and paper ready. The good news for you, if you go at the end of the broadcast, those of you who are watching, you'll be able to get these slides, and this slides for free, and the slides do have the links so that you can follow the links and you can see the source.
Sorry, Charles.
Material that we're working with.
Okay, I'm going to be very careful here because we're operating on hotel bandwidth. So you're saying that people can go to the archives for Sunday with Charles and see all the links that you work with on our playlist there.
Yeah, exactly. But on the art department's picture there, we have Bill Hillary and Chelsea Clinton, who, of course, part of this broadcast, we're going to begin to push harder on the question of whether it's Bill alone, Bill with Hillary, and Chelsea, not really understanding everything, or Bill fighting with Hillary and Chelsea in the background fighting with both of them, or whether it's Chelsea really growing to realize that as she looks, and she's not stupid, as she looks at this long track record going all the way back to the 23rd of October 1997 and before when she was younger, this is a monumental scandal. And so one message for her in particular, and for her advisors and her family members, her husband and those that counsel them, is that you're in a moment of choosing now. You've crossed the Rubicon. We're going to tell a tale now of what happened partially in the Caribbean. Chelsea, no doubt, is aware of some of this, but not all of it. And the other two people who were inserted in there are really very junior supporting cast characters. We have George W. Bush in there as a pirate, and we also have Barack Obama as a pirate. But in terms of the wider scheme of things here, unfortunately, when you get involved with a charity fraud, if you are a piece of it, doesn't matter whether you're a 1% player, a 0.5% player, or a 50% player. If you're enabling, if you're part of charity fraud, you get tagged for charity fraud. You're a co-conspirator in charity fraud. So it's going to be incumbent, I think, on the people who may have found themselves attached to this, but really can credibly claim they didn't know the full extent of it. It's going to become incumbent on them to stand up, join Team America, do the right thing, stop fighting a losing battle. Because as we show in the first page of the main slides, this is really, in my mind, a charity crime syndicate. And it's different than the Corinne Brown fraud, because the Corinne Brown fraud just exploited children inside the United States of America. The Clinton Charity Crime Syndicate, in my mind, has exploited principally black and brown children around the world who are part of disaster relief. You go back to the disaster relief where it started in Gujarat, India, those are brown children. You move on to the disaster relief, the mammoth one in tsunami, 2004 and 5, those are brown children. You get into Papua New Guinea, more brown children. And then you go down into, I skipped over Katrina, that's brown children in New Orleans. And then you go down to what we're going to talk about today in some depth in Haiti, where it's all about brown children. So the penalties for engaging in disaster relief charity fraud are very, very serious when they are applied. If federal prosecutors choose to go down that route, each request for money, not each receipt, but each request for money is a federal felony crime, punished depending on how the prosecutors and judges tend to look at it. If you're a highly educated, powerful person exploiting gullible donors, then each count arguably could be 30 years in prison, the way I read it. And that would mean that each request for $1 is as bad as a request for $10, $100, or $1 million. So you look at this thing, this is a gigantic mess. And it's a case here, just when we think about Haiti, which is in the news now, sadly, we're 8 years almost to the day from when that earthquake happened. Not only did this whole operation exploit desperately poor people, but it's highly likely, once the forensic accountants get into this, and they will be getting into this, in my opinion, and the FBI in particular has incredibly well-trained forensic accountants. Once you have access to bank wire data and bank statements, you can do things that I haven't been able to do from the public record. Once you have a sitting grand jury, as I believe may already exist, you can use subpoena power to wrestle, as happened with the Fusion GPS thing and TD Bank. You could use subpoena power to get very detailed banking information. Not to mention, once you're on the same team as the Treasury Department and other people who are now being installed in the Trump administration, you can get files out of the IRS, you can get files out of the Treasury Department, and you can really put this puzzle back together and see how bad it was and figure out how much money likely was diverted from governments who stepped up to the plate, from private people, from foundations, for the potential personal enrichment of the Clintons and their cronies. And this is going to end up being quite a sordid tale and a case example, a cautionary case example.
And as you've said many times, Charles, it's not specifically the receipt of money that is the crime, it's the very solicitation. So the fact that there have been so many solicitations, it just boggles the mind, literally, the number of counts that are applicable in this particular situation.
I don't know if you remember back to school days, those books, Hooked on Phonics.
Yeah.
And my mother was a teacher after we were ready in school and stuff, and she was always bringing home those books, Hooked on Phonics. I think here we have Hooked on Charity Fraud, Hooked on Charity Fraud crack.
Yeah. Now, with that, Charles, why don't we go right to your slide presentation?
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So if we could go to, actually, I've covered the first one. If we go to the second page.
Mm-hmm. Well, do we want to give the standard disclaimer, or have we had enough of that?
That's the second page that I'm focused on.
Of course.
So I think we're likely to have some new viewers, and thank you very much to the various people who've been having Jason on shows and me on shows. Thanks to Doug Hagman, Ed Opperman, Lionel, Patrice Lead, David Knight, many people, Dan Happel, many people have now approached, I think, certainly approached me, and I believe Jason approached you, international television operations, and I think in the coming week we're going to see a lot more activity. But for the new people to our series here, Sunday with Charles, first of all, welcome. And please read this important disclaimer when you punch out the slides, you print out the slides, and understand that what we're doing here at present is simply taking publicly available information, analyzing it, and giving you, the viewer, the opportunity to look at it yourself, form your own conclusions. If you feel that you have a different view and you want to make some constructive criticism to us, you can easily contact me on my site or via Twitter. And I value criticism, constructive criticism. I block hostile, silly comments. So be advised, you try that on Twitter, you're never going to talk to me. But I do welcome constructive criticism, and many people have excellent points of view. We put down my Twitter handle and Jason's Twitter handle. In addition, below that, there's a great playlist that Jason curates that has all of our previous shows. And for those of you coming for the first time, we're not going to go back over all the old ground. We try to pick up a few threads so that the new viewers can understand what we're talking about. But there are now, at this point, hours and hours of presentation. It's not necessarily laid out, the entire list, for the personal viewer, but for the government that wants to get up to speed, whether that's a national government, a state government. You will find that, I believe, humbly, that if you listen to each one of these broadcasts, you will save yourself an enormous amount of time. And we're trying to take you through systematically the various contours of this massive fraud. So without further ado, let's go into the slide 3 out of 15.
Mm-hmm. What actually happened?
Right. So in the quiet of the night, and actually before it was announced on the 4th of January 2018 that the FBI and the Department of Justice operating out of Little Rock were indeed investigating the Clinton Foundation. Lots of these investigations have been ongoing. Now, under the Obama administration, through the 20th of January 2017 at noon, I would argue what was going on were fake investigations. I would, not to pick on the Obama administration, I would argue that going back even into the Bush era, the investigations were fake, in the sense that while they had FBI people working or trying to work out of field offices, they didn't necessarily, under the Obama administration, have seated grand juries. So the FBI investigators didn't have the benefit of subpoena power to coax the records out that need to be coaxed out, and that I believe are now being coaxed out, certainly out of the Little Rock office, where there may be a seated grand jury. There's some reports speculating about that. And hopefully in time out of other locations, because this is a fraud in my mind that has important legs here in New York, and certainly in the Southern District, maybe in the Eastern District of New York. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't understand exactly how the different FBI offices might all work together, but I suspect certainly in Maryland, there are issues. In Miami, there likely are issues. In New Orleans, there are issues. In Los Angeles, there are issues. There could be issues in other U.S. attorney areas and other FBI offices across this country, and there must be issues all over the world. So what's happened is, in this new year, 2018, the vice is really tightening on these Clinton Foundation frauds.
In large part due to the investigation that you've been conducting and the work we've been doing here, Charles. I think it's informed a lot of these organizations.
I hope so. So to start with, we've been getting some criticism. I on Twitter and even on television, radio, etc. Hosts will say to me, come on, she lost. She's up there in Chappaqua walking in the woods, drinking Chardonnay and, throwing glass figurines at Bill whenever he shows up. Why are you doing this? And I think the answer, I like to bring this up, this is really for the new viewers. We don't have to pull the link up, Jason, if you don't want to, but the first link is a link to the 50-page sentencing memo that really takes you through chapter and verse what happens when prosecutors decide to go after a politically prominent person. That was in the case Corinne Brown, the former congressperson from the Jacksonville, Florida area. This is a 50-page memo that we said in the past, if you do a global cut and replace Brown for Clinton, you basically have the case laid out for, in the Brown case, it's an $800,000 charity fraud, and I would argue in this case, we're talking minimum $2.3 billion. But you see in that sentencing memo, you see chapter and verse on why the system of law takes such a dim view and operate a charity fraud. There are worse things, I suppose. Taking advantage of children sexually is probably worse, certainly worse. But charity fraud is diabolical, and most people don't understand that. We're all good natures. We hear, or most of us are good natured. We hear about a problem. Somebody asks you for a few bucks, whatever that bucks is to you. You give them a few bucks, try to help out. But when a complete fraudster is concocting an argument for help and then walking off for the money, and the law decides with the money, and the law decides to land on you, they're going to land on you. So don't underestimate the seriousness with which lawyers and prosecutors and government authorities will move once the switch gets flipped into high. It's currently, I would argue, on medium. It's about to go on high. It could go on extra high. And do not underestimate as well the significance of that Friday revelation. There was a dead of night revelation about how the co-president of a Maryland trucking firm was indicted. Now, why is that interesting? It's not good news for him, but it's very interesting for this process because the Clintons and those around the Clintons have been trying like heck to make sure that we don't go into the history prior to December 31st, 2009. And that's because as bad as the financial statements and public reports are for 2010 forward, they're horrible from 2009 back to the founding. And this Maryland trucking case involves problems prior to December 31st, 2009. As this prosecution proceeds, as people apply pressure, more and more evidence is going to come to light. The rumors are that there is evidence from a confidential informant that show bags of cash being paid as part of this matter with the Maryland trucking case, bags of cash being routed to the Clinton Foundation prior to December 31st, 2009. And who knows what happened to those bags of cash and why they were sent there. So that's real stuff. There is actually an indictment. It was published. There's 2 links there that explain it. And then we also have this background on the Mickerin case. That's a case where somebody was, instead of being prosecuted immediately, somebody in connection with this Maryland trucking matter was, accused. It took a long time to bring that person to justice. We're going to learn just whether, our government under the Obama administration went soft in the Mickerin case to delay as much as possible the public understanding what was really happening with Uranium One. That's all going to come in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Now, Charles, was there any link in the Maryland trucking situation with, is it Sarpayev? I know George Webb has done a lot of reporting on the trucking guy who did a terrorist activity in New York.
I don't know about that, Jason. But I think on the whole issue of Maryland trucking and uranium, we should watch closely for developments. There could be some big developments in the short term. This is the opening slide where I like to lay out some of the interesting things that have just recently happened that are going to affect us in the coming week.
So unsealed indictments related to Uranium One seem to be dropping like hip hop albums.
Exactly. So over the weekend, I forget whether it was last night or this morning, Bill Clinton made, I think, a rather large error. First of all, opening his pie hole, and secondly, secondly, tweeting out that he was personally insulted by the suggestion that Chelsea's wedding or wedding dress or wedding may have been paid for in part by the Clinton Foundation. Now, my reaction, I tweeted out a rather rough riposte to that, but we won't need to get into it. It might make a little bit of news later on in the week. But the surprising thing about it is, you know, he didn't disclaim responsibility for the massive fraud. He just said, "I didn't take any of the money to pay for the wedding." Okay. So you paid for the wedding. That's fine. Now, what'd you do with the other several $100 billion? Because I don't think the wedding was that expensive. It was really, you know, Bill Clinton generally is pretty astute and deft when it comes mostly to his political pronouncements. This was not so smart.
I think the wedding was very expensive, Charles. I believe you had the fish.
Believe it or not, I nearly went to that wedding.
No way.
Yes, way.
We got to hear about that, but I know you're sensitive to the time. I mean, how were you invited to Chelsea Clinton's wedding?
I wasn't. For a time, I was dating somebody who was one of Chelsea's friends.
Oh, and, I see.
And they made noises about me going to the wedding, and I was like, I never met Chelsea, but I just felt that was like, you know, I don't know,
that
going deep into Indian country.
Right.
So, it happened. What I basically told in my tweet is, I said, you know, something like, you know, Bill Clinton should put a little ice on that false outrage of his, because after all, I mean, we're just talking about a dress, and I didn't know at the time when I said that, that that's the title of our friend Juanita Broderick's new book. Put a little ice on that. Wow. And I also didn't know that I did a recent repeat appearance with Ed Opperman, who's a guy you should meet, Jason, by the way. He's out in Nevada, I think. I think he might be in Vegas. And I did I taped for the second hour of his 2-hour show, and I didn't know then that the first hour was Juanita Broderick, but we have a link that you could, our listeners can go and can look at. Now, I've had the privilege, there's a fellow named Mark Tapscott who has gone now to work for LifeSet as, I think, their editor, or I'm not sure what his exact title is, but he's a longtime distinguished investigative journalist, and he's asked me to write a few articles. So I wrote one that got a certain amount of attention about explaining that justice is coming for the Clintons. And one of the reasons, we talked about it last time, but one of the reasons briefly is that under New York law, because of this investigation, this announced investigation, the FBI and U.S. attorneys and also the IRS, some, I'm told by lawyers, some would argue that material changes have occurred, which are required filings in New York and maybe in other states, which will greatly complicate the Clintons' ability to get an clean audit done for 2017. So justice is coming from many directions against the Clintons. Now, on the question of Haiti, Donald Trump, of course, we won't use the S word, but Donald Trump, unfortunately, may have made intemperate remarks that have gotten a lot of attention. And
but,
you know,
Charles,
most people.
Did he say that? Because I've heard conflicting reports as to whether or not that was actually said, or if that was just fake news.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Senator Dick Durbin, when you look into his history, he has a long history of lying and of making inflammatory comments about what somebody said that nobody can check. And so Donald Trump is prone to language that can be incendiary. But let's take a step back. What's worse, using words or actually stealing money from desperately poor people over decades? I mean, which is worse? And I think in the case of the Clintons, it's a very big mistake to draw attention, as they have done. Each of them, the three of them, had tweets about, we've spent a lot of time, we know about Haiti, we know about Africa, we know about brown-skinned people, we've spent our lifetime helping them. Oh, really now?
Right.
Well, we're not going to spend time today on Africa, because that's something that we can do and will do and have done to a certain extent. We're going to do it in great depth. But today we're going to talk about Haiti. And in doing so, we build on work done by a wonderful collection of people. I can't name everybody in the slide, but there's a lady named Dottie Cherry, who's actually I think a biology professor, but also in her spare time an investigative reporter. A gentleman out in where you are, Gilbert Mercier, who is another film producer and investigator. Patrice Lead, you know her, is a fantastic radio host. And there are many other progressives, actually, who are up in arms, particularly about what the Clintons have done in Haiti. So we're going to dig into that a little bit.
Okay.
So we could go to the next slide.
Page 4.
Yes, sir. We're ripping through this.
Yes. Merchants of Misery.
Yeah, that's a term that I don't know if I coined it, but I think it's appropriate. People who are in the business of pointing to misery and then saying, give us your money so we can help these people, when in reality, the people end up more miserable than before. Now, when you go through the history of Haiti, I don't know it extremely well, but it happens that when I was in college, a friend of mine was the ambassador to Haiti. Wow. His father was the ambassador to Haiti in and around 1975. And, I got to know him reasonably well, and I was thinking of, where are cheap places to go on vacation. And I said to this guy, I said, hey, should I go on my spring vacation or Christmas vacation? Should I go down to Haiti? And the look he gave me, here's the son of the ambassador. He said, you don't want to go to Haiti. It's hell on earth.
Wow.
So the first question I have is, what in the hell was Bill Clinton doing, taking his newlywed wife to Haiti in 1975 for the honeymoon? Was there not a war zone he could have taken her to? I mean, it's not the most unlikeliest of places. Mm-hmm. And then to develop this relationship with Aristide, and we don't have enough time, and on the subject of sources, there are some Wikipedia links in here. And I put them in not because, I accept everything that's in them, but just because they're often a shortcut. You go to Wikipedia, look at what they say, you start checking it. You read up on this Aristide guy. Very complex man, very questionable beliefs, liberation theology, some say even voodoo, and other things, and, corrupt as hell as far as I can tell. The Clintons Bill in particular had a very complex relationship with him. It's reinstalling him in power, then not necessarily doing much as he was taken out of power. Then you get into the whole issue of, it used to be that in Haiti there were import tariffs placed on foreign rice into Haiti, and that allowed the local Haitian rice business to actually work. But those under Bill's prodding, those tariffs were taken away, and as a result, the Haitians are even more dependent on imported rice. So they're basically, I would argue, not even a colony at this point. They have very little globally competitive international exports. They live at the mercy and on the edge of generosity from around the world. And the Clintons have been down there. Obviously, when they're just out of college and law school in '75, this is 43 years ago. They've been messing around with Haiti.
Charles, let me take you back for 1 second, because you mentioned the word voodoo. And one of Bill Clinton's books, he wrote in his own words that they went to some voodoo practicing thing, and that they actually engaged in some form of witchcraft or learned about it or something like that.
That would explain a lot. That would, maybe that priest not only did that priest put a curse on Haiti, but a curse on the United States of America.
Well, joking aside, though, we've heard Larry Nichols say that Hillary Clinton has been involved in occult things. We've seen in the John Podesta emails in WikiLeaks, they're talking about Tholema, which is an occult religion. They're talking about spirit cooking and things like this. So a lot of people laugh these things off and find them utterly ridiculous. But what if there is an occult connection there?
I hope not. I don't like to think about things like that. One of the I just don't like to think about things like that. One of my most memorable experiences was when I was 20 years old. I spent part of the summer in West Africa, and believe it or not, I was in college, but I was studying in a law school, Temple University Law School, and a bunch of these older people said, "Hey, why don't we go to a movie?" And I said, "Well, what movie's playing?" And this is in the middle of a campus, like very rural area. Mm-hmm. Well, you go over to this hall, and we're showing The Exorcist. I don't know if you remember the first scene of The Exorcist, but the first scene of The Exorcist is an exorcism in West Africa. And I can tell you, I ran back at night from that. I never ran as fast as I ran back from that movie theater. I don't like going there. But by 2003, the Clinton Foundation, according to press releases that they issued and that others have issued, and this is a new one up there that goes into considerable depth. It claims that by 2003, the Clinton Foundation was operating in Haiti. And we have in that press release a claim that they were also promoting the sale of Ranbaxy drugs in 2003. And as we've talked in the past, the Clinton Foundation had no legal authority to operate internationally at all. Bill Clinton had no strict legal connection to his charity in 2003. Any activity set up in Haiti had no legal validity. They likely did not disclose by 2003 a business development arrangement that had been entered into between the Clinton Foundation, and a legal business development arrangement between the Clinton Foundation and this crooked drug company. And later, as we've talked about in the past, Ranbaxy was forced to admit and plead guilty in May of 2013 in a criminal action brought under the auspices in part of Rod Rosenstein. They were forced to admit that they had never tested any of their drugs prior to August 2004. So what business did the Clinton Foundation have, A, entering into deals in India with Ranbaxy, and B, likely distributing these crooked drugs into the Caribbean, into Haiti, and before 2003, likely into the Bahamas, which is not, strictly speaking, the Caribbean.
And Charles, haven't you said in the past that it's just flatly illegal for a charity to engage in any activity that promotes the sale of pharmaceuticals? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, that's a separate issue that you can't, there's a specific drug case that Michael Smith actually brought our attention to, Federated Physicians or something like that, wherein if you distribute drugs, that doesn't mean that that's charitable, right? I mean, if you give them away, it's possible they're charitable. But if you go to one bunch of people and say, "Hey, give me the money for drugs," and then you go to a crooked drug company and you say, "Hey, give me an invoice saying that I bought some drugs from you," and the donor gives you $2 billion and you spend $1 billion in theory in crooked invoices, but you really spend $100 million, that is hardly charity. That's larceny. It's fraud. Right. And I think that's what you're referring to. So that work that was done with charities, and we're going to get into with several charities, included work done with Partners in Health. And in another broadcast, we're going to go into and examine this record of Partners in Health in great depth, going all the way back to the late 80s. And this man, Dr. Paul Farmer, and his co-founder, Dr. Jim Kim. Farmer, in particular, is lionized, as some say he's a living Albert Schweitzer. He should get Nobel Prizes and this and that. I don't think so, based on what I've seen. And we're going to be taking people through that. And the legal filings of Partners in Health are every bit They're smaller, but they're every bit, in terms of finances, but they're every bit as checkered as the Clinton Foundation, in my view. So, as we move past 2003, we're going to go into this in some depth, focusing on the period 2009 forward. The Clinton operation does who knows what in Haiti, because the disclosures are not granular enough to let us see specifically what they were doing year by year by year. Mm-hmm. But by the time the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund is created, this application on Form 1023, we've talked about this in the past, there is no that application on 1023 of all the predecessor work that the Clinton Foundation had done in Haiti and the defects in that work, or the predecessor work that the Clinton Foundation had done, in theory, in disaster relief in India, in tsunami, in Katrina, and in the Gulf Coast. So this 1023 for the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund is yet another textbook case of how not to apply for federal tax exemption. We have no information yet on what filings they may have filed in the various states. And I'll take you through shortly the fact that they operated in all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. And I have not been able to find any paperwork yet that shows that this charity between two former presidents, operating in the name of two former presidents, actually did their paperwork properly. So that we said in the past that there's no formal audit of how much money actually was raised by Bill Clinton in his role as special UN envoy for Haiti. But there is this puff piece, I think it's the first one, it says statistics, that goes through, but again, nothing's checkable, that purports to say that $13 billion was raised, in theory, for UN efforts led by Bill Clinton and I think a former president or prime minister of Haiti in connection with this earthquake. $13 billion. And I will show you shortly just how significant that sum is. I mean, in the United States, $13 billion, it's a lot of money. In Haiti, $13 billion is, you can't even describe what you could buy for $13 billion in Haiti.
Maybe you could buy Haiti.
Why buy it when you can steal it? But the other thing is there's never really been any sort of rigorous check on how the major donors, and I'm thinking there of, in particular, of Dennis O'Brien and Digicel, the wireless telecommunications operation. There's no check of how people like Dennis O'Brien and others who gave small money to these efforts, both at the Clinton Foundation and maybe in the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund, how those people may have derived outside personal benefits and outside support for their companies. That link there, people can look at in their leisure, shows you an IPO, initial public offering prospectus, that I don't think ever got off the ground. I could be wrong. And it gives you a sense of the finances of Digicel, which are horrific, in my view.
Why are they horrific?
Well, because, with all these grants and stuff, the thing is still losing money and has a lot of debt. And, it's not the kind of financial statements I like to see. I like to see growing revenues. I like to see fat profits. Competitive profits and nice cash flow margins, cash coming from the business. This is the opposite. This does not show good financial metrics.
Huh. I thought the whole Digicel operation in Haiti was all about establishing a peer-to-peer digital payment network that now they basically control all the finances there in Haiti. There you've got like almost a digital currency that's under the control of Digicel.
Well, that's one thing, and it's also traditional wireless services. But you're right. That peer-to-peer routing of money is, to me, something that needs to be controlled. I know you like your Bitcoin, or you like Bitcoin, and now you like Ethereum, but this whole idea of routing money that's untraceable is something that is, I think, a very bad idea. Mm-hmm. And in Haiti, a lot of that was going on. Haitians and Filipinos and other countries, like that, where people leave Haiti and the Philippines, not because they are, I'm not going to use the word, bad countries, opportunities are better in the United States. Often the people who leave those places arrive in the United States and want to send money back home. And sending cash, maybe earned illegally in the United States, via these payment mechanisms down to Haiti, down to the Philippines, is something that we really should have quite a discussion about.
Oh, Charles, you there? Got a little bit of a hiccup there. Charles, can you hear me? Whoop. Charles?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. One other thing I wanted to ask you, because one of the big concerns for me, I find the blockchain of Bitcoin very secure. Obviously, something like this Digicel peer-to-peer cell phone payment network, it's in some ways it seems to me similar in that they're building people's confidence in this digital currency system, but then they control it. And if it's unregulated and if the technology is ahead of the legislation, as it is possibly in Haiti with Digicel and certainly in the case of cryptocurrency around the world, it gives the person who controls that digital system, whether it's through cryptocurrency exchanges or in the case of Digicel, the people that control the network, if ever they decide they want to shut off that spigot, if you turn off the money supply, you've got a great deal of control over the people that rely on that money supply.
Exactly, and also what you could do if you've got a bunch of dirty money that you want to send, from Ireland, from the South Pacific, from Asia, from wherever, from the Middle East, route it through this Digicel system into, quote, the Central Bank of Haiti, which I'm sure is run pristinely, no chance of corruption there, or towards an account in the Cayman Islands on the benefit of the Central Bank of Haiti. You could easily see how that would be, quite a large laundry.
Right.
So, out of all this, back in, I entered college in 1974, and I ended up spending some time studying developing country economics and politics. And, everyone likes to talk about foreign aid. Some people on the right will say, foreign aid is a waste of money. People on the left will say foreign aid is essential. Some of them, others will say, well, if we've got money for foreign aid, why don't we spend that money in the inner cities across this country? Mm-hmm. But whatever your point of view on foreign aid, and we are a rich country at present, I think we should be able to agree across the political spectrum that there needs to be accountability for monies spent. And I would point out that while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, I've seen recent verbiage out of the conservative treehouse, which is a great website. A poster there, I think, called Sundance, pointed out, I didn't realize there were 72 inspector generals and, gigantic staff underneath them. But the only one, or one of the very few that was not in place from January 21st, 2009 to February 1st, 2013 was the one over top the State Department. And to me, that just is a screaming red flag. I mean, our money that we're our hard-earned money or our hard-borrowed money that we're sending now around the world needs to be watched over scrupulously. And there's a lot of ways in which, as you see in Haiti, money could disappear. So there needs to be accountability for not only the money that we send, but the degree to which cronies, and I would argue it's most likely Clinton cronies in this case, benefited from streams of money or guarantees or whatever that went into places like Haiti while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. That is a big area that I think we really need to study.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to this peer-to-peer Digicel payment system. Speaking of screaming red flags, the fact that they installed and control a digital payment system that's an alternative to whatever currency is issued in Haiti, it just, I'm not a financial expert, I'm not a cryptography, technological, I'm not the guy, but it seems like that needs a lot more scrutiny. That's just got to be something.
I agree. So if we move on to the next slide. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm trying to take people through country by country. This is not a very detailed chart. There's some numbers on it. Forgive me, but again, we're using the standard approach here. sorry for the color red, but in this metric, red is bad. Green is good. So I suppose I'm a reddist. But anyway, but if I try to take some big building blocks, this is for the period 2015. So this is 5 years, or really 6 years, into the process wherein the Clintons, Hillary as Secretary of State, Bill as Special UN Envoy, involved with the Clinton Foundation, had spent 6 years trying to get things better in Haiti, with 13 billion out of the UN effort and only a paltry 50 million out of the Clinton push. Haiti. You see what? They're wonderful people in Haiti. Everyone's met some of them, but they're wonderful people stuck in Haiti. But the population is just too small. It's 10 million, so it's 3% of the U.S. size. Sadly, it's growing faster than our population, and I say sadly because they don't have the resources, as we'll see in a second, the infrastructure to take care of their people, and it's a very young population. There are not a lot of experienced people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. It's a very youth-oriented population. The consumption, look at that consumption per person. Okay, $743. It's like $60 a month.
Wow.
Okay, that's to pay for everything: housing, clothing, food, whatever. In contrast, we're $38,000.
Wow.
Okay, the market itself, $7.5 billion consumption. Okay, we send them 13 billion. We send them 2 years consumption, and the place is still an S whatever. And it's just the magnitude of this waste, the callousness of sending this money down there and not having an inspector general at the State Department, not having forms for anything that are audited properly, particularly this small Clinton Bush Haiti fund, is unbelievable.
Charles,
the exports,
real quickly, for people who aren't necessarily financial experts or familiar with these delineations, so the consumption per person, that's each person in Haiti, food and clothing or whatever they're buying, is only $743 per month?
Per year.
Per year? $743. And the total market of everybody in Haiti is
$7.5 billion. So you're sitting there and you're saying you're Boeing, right? And you're saying, hey, I got a new expensive plane. Where should I sell it? You're not going to be selling it in Haiti because there's nobody who can buy it. You go down a notch. You're sitting there, you're Chrysler, and you're saying, or a Fiat Chrysler, why don't I sell a car? Let's see who can afford to buy a car in Haiti. The answer is like 6 people. And by the way, this number is across the board. This doesn't adjust for the fact that wealth is concentrated and income is concentrated. So if you were to take the top 10% out, as a guess in Haiti, the top 10% consumes 40% of the consumption. The numbers get even worse. But I'm just, we don't need to make the dread case. I'm just looking at the numbers that are there. This is a market that hasn't yet, an economic market, that if these numbers are correct, which I suspect they could be close, is not to a level yet where it can support or even compete with many, many nations that are out there that are engaged in, dynamic competition, trying to innovate and come up with high-tech products and other more expensive products. And you see as well that the exports, often with countries that have a small internal market, they are able to export something. You take Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's internal market is puny, but they export their oil and gas all over the place.
Right.
So in a smaller, and Saudi Arabia is a lot bigger than Haiti, but if you look at that number, that their exports are just 22% of their consumption. I mean, this is a country that really needs, it just needs help. Who are thoughtful, who are objective, who can resist temptation, and there needs to be. It's not the Trump comment about this. There needs to be a question mark put over a country like this in 2018. Can this country actually compete?
Now, Charles, would you say that the financial weakness and overall sort of weak position that Haiti is in made it a target for the Clintons? It would certainly seem that way.
Well, there's a pattern. I mean, you look at the places they operate, and for all the comments about Donald Trump's comment, I mean, the places where the Clinton Foundation has ripped people off include India, Papua New Guinea, Haiti, places that are filled with brown-skinned poor people with resources that can be, and across Africa, It's one thing to make comments. It's another thing to actually rape and pillage across, these desperately poor places.
Yeah.
And, when you look at, as well, the case of that VCS mining, the idea that while Hillary was Secretary of State, that a shell company would come together and negotiate a deal that's so off-market to exploit substantial, not by American standards, but substantial in terms of the local economy standards, gold reserves that do exist in Haiti, and give them to a company.
Her brother.
That one of her brothers was going to be, with no experience, of course, in mining, because you don't need to have experience if you're related to a Clinton. You just, get stuff given to you. And you look at a country this poor, and mind you, these statistics are after the Clintons have been in there for 6 recent years, forgetting about the part before 2010. So the investment level, $2.7 billion in total, is tiny for a country of 10 million people, and that's what happens. When you have these negative metrics that say that the market really is not significant yet, it's not built to a place where you can really sell much into it, you can't attract investment. You can't, the real investment they need, frankly, is I don't know how much it would cost to get electricity across the country and roads that actually worked. Now, before we beat up too much on the Clintons, the origin of Haiti's distress actually dates back, I believe, in part to the French who got to Haiti when Haiti had forests on it and cut down their wood. And basically denuded the hills, etc. And that is a very dangerous thing to do to an island, because what that does is it strips off the topsoil, and it creates a very difficult agricultural environment. Haiti, which used to be very rich agriculturally, faces some major challenges. So.
Interesting.
Then if you look at one thing that people don't understand, here in Manhattan, where you and I both live, in Los Angeles, in the United States, in most Western countries, urban areas are about 80% or more of, 80% of the population live in urban areas. Why is that relevant? When you have the population concentrated, it's easier to distribute goods and services to them, and it's easier to justify investments, both government and private investment, around these cities. Mm-hmm. Haiti is still in a place where less than 60% of the population is, in quotes, in urban areas. And we could debate just how urban Port-au-Prince and some of these other cities is. They're not really well-developed urban areas.
Right. And
you try to track down, today, human beings, especially your father's a doctor, and whether you love him or not, I assume you do.
Of course,
he's a good doctor. Yeah, I'm just saying he's a good doctor, and how the kind of sacrifices doctors make. It's long hours, especially if they have to do emergency calls and stuff like that. It's a lot of training. It's a lot of paying for insurance and keeping up with stuff.
Yeah, and
it's kind of tough to administer healthcare when you don't have any doctors. Or money, or the ability to, it's not just, you can't just have a patient show up and you give them a magic pill and say, go back into the bush and let me know how it's going by sign language, because there's no telephone wire, there's no, so we don't know how many doctors. We're talking
about a nation that's kind of existing in a time of, 50, 100 years ago, before technology. They don't have the modern conveniences that we all take for granted.
And this is after the Clintons have spent a fair amount of time there. I mean, the $13 billion that supposedly was directed. Look at that. $13 billion is, what is it, 5 times? Yeah, it's 5 times the annual total investment that off that page there in 2015. $2.7 billion in 1 year in investment. $13 billion in aid went to this thing, 5 years worth of capital expenditures, and all they got to show for it is some broken down, you know, sweatshop factories in Caracol, a high-end hotel, you know, in an area that was not hurt by the earthquake, 45 million. What happened to all that money?
Right.
And so if we go to the next page, this is interesting. I mean, it's interesting for Mary. I apologize. This will be the last one that has a lot of numbers on it. But it's important that we lay this stuff out. You would never know what happened with the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund if you tried to look on the Clinton Foundation website, because there's none of these filings are there. But it was a public charity, and that means that you can get the filings, and I provide the link in that blue to all these filings that are, and actually there's another one for 2013 that we'll get to later on. Well, when you look at this, for all the bragging that was going on with the Clintons and the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, in total, the revenues of the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, the total incoming grants were $50 million. And we're going to get to that, whether the revenues were really $50 million or whether they might have been a lot more than that, and that some of them might have been diverted.
And this is a great site, Charles, that people can use for themselves, ProPublica.com. I've used this, and it's a very informative site.
And I would argue, and I would add as well, you know, to those who think that I'm just a partisan hack, ProPublica is a, I would argue, progressive site that is funded, was originally, you know, seed funded by the Sandler family, who sold out of Great West Financial and are multi-billionaires. And they have really done fantastic. They put a lot of money behind this ProPublica. They do a lot of great investigative journalism, and you're absolutely right, Jason. This ProPublica Nonprofit Explorer is fantastic, a fantastic resource for finding the real filings, including those of other Clinton Foundation entities that are not on the Clinton Foundation site, which I would argue are material omissions. You wouldn't see the fraud as well if you didn't have the access to this information.
Right.
So you look at that, okay, 50 million came in revenues from between 2010 and 2012. All right, what did they do with it? They turned around and they put 26 million into other people's charities. So, you know, this daisy chain idea that you raise money for your charity and then you turn around and say, I know what I'll do. I'll give it to somebody else. And you could end up in a place where you don't really appreciate the layers of overhead that go, well, this one, it looks like there's not much in the way of overhead. You know, when you then go into the next level down, you say, okay, well, they took it from this one and they gave it to somebody else who had overhead. The overhead ratios get bigger and bigger. So 26 million or 52% went to U.S. charities. 12 million or so went to foreign charities. 37 million or 75% were grants to other charities.
Wow.
And this other thing, we don't know exactly what was going on with this other money. And the management, the fundraising looks light.
Wow.
Okay?
But 4.3 million for other. Is that maybe mini golf strip club outings?
It could be suntan lotion and people to apply the suntan lotion. But anyway, if you go to 2010, let's think about 2010. We're going to go year by year, but just if you look at 2010, that's the year where the earthquake hit. That's the year where the money came rushing in. And in particular, when there are these big natural disasters, what really happens, is that the money comes in the most right around the earthquake date. That's when it comes, or the disaster date. It comes pouring in.
The news is there. People are ready to give.
Yeah, it's getting 24/7 coverage, breathless people flying around the world to the site, et cetera. And everyone just reaches in, and the money comes pouring in. Frequently, as in this case, before the charity is actually formed, before it has legal form, before it is deemed to be federally tax exempt by our IRS. But if you look at 2010, they only spent, out of the 49 million, the bulk of the money came in 2010, they only spent 7.7 million on grants. They only spent 8.8 million in total. they had 40 million in what is akin to being profit, the difference between the inflows and the expenses. So the accounting, as we'll show later, in 2010, by the Clinton Foundation for their interest, their 50% interest in this Clinton Bush Haiti fund is completely wrong. You can't track it. And they include the Clinton Bush Haiti fund in 2010 when it's akin to being a profit, but they exclude it in 11 and 12 when they have massive losses. You see 14 million loss, $20 million loss in that change in net assets line. Okay? The other thing they do...
You said in the past, Charles, that charities aren't supposed to have profits, right?
Using the term profit loosely. This is not really the correct term is change in net assets, but to make it our viewers, I'm just calling it a profit.
Got it.
You're right, Jason. Now, one quick thing. I promise I won't be too pedantic here, but when you look at a charity or a business, net assets is one key number. That's akin to being your accumulated net worth. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this charity started on January 28th, 2010, with nothing. Mm-hmm. It generated 40.3 million in net assets in 2010. So it ended the year with 40.3 million, and there's no discrepancy between the calculation you would come up with using the income statement side of what's called the statement of activities side and the statement of position side. There's no discrepancy. If you look at 2011, there's no discrepancy. But in 2012, there's 5.8 million goes missing in 2012. And we will show you on the next page that there's some serious red flags about what happened in 2012. Okay?
So 5.8 million is missing in 2012?
Yeah.
Oh, the discrepancy. I see that line.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you take the starting position, you had 26 million in starting net assets at the beginning of 2012. Mm-hmm. You had a change in net assets of negative 20. Your ending position should be 5.8 million, but it's not. It's zero. So 5.8 million inextricably went out of this thing in 2012. And we'll get to what I think happened. And why.
Yet another book.
Exactly. So if we go to the next page. Mm-hmm. So again, you wouldn't know any of this because it's omitted from the Clinton Foundation website. And here's Bill saying, reacting to this, the people are teasing him about possibly using some of the 13 billion that might have been raised, or some of the money that we'll get to that could have been skimmed out from January 12th to January 28th. Bill's all hot and bothered about the wedding issue. He should be a lot more hot and bothered. I mean, this is a man who's very smart. His name is on the door of this Clinton Bush Haiti thing. He took a lot of credit for it. How come he can't do basic stuff? I mean, the 990, the IRS tax return is signed by this lady, Anita Bott. We've talked about her before. She signs the tax return for 2010 on September 7th, 2011. Now, how do you sign a tax return that's supposed to have a completed audit on September 7th, 2011, when the audit is not complete until the 12th of September? Can't do that.
It's interesting.
Unless you can travel back in time,
right,
or forward in time. Now, the thing that's interesting here is that when you look into this missing 990 that's not on the Clinton Foundation website, prosecutors, attorneys general, and investigators around the world, you see that they filed in 36 states and in Washington, D.C., various forms. Except you can't get those forms. Now, I can't get them, but you investigators and prosecutors could get them. And if you got those forms, you'd see what this entity claimed, on which date they were doing, and what controls they had in 2010. Then you move into 2011. Well, sorry, the other thing is that in 2010, the earthquake happened on the 12th of January, and the year starts on January 28th, 2010.
The fiscal
so just
year,
as it? Well, that's what's called a partial year, or in a short period thing, not a complete year. Going back to the Clinton Foundation, we've talked about this in the past. The original Clinton Foundation was set up on October 23rd, 1997, had activity in 97 through the year end, but never filed a short year, partial year return, right? These guys did file a partial year return, but it looks to me like very shaky. Then in 2011, they file a return for the full year. Again, this Anita Bott signs it. She signs it on the 9th of November 2012. And as we've talked about in the past, that's this 7/11 to 9/November 2012 are very important periods. This is where there's concern over what's going on at the Clinton Foundation. Simpson Thatcher gets brought in October of 2011. You got an election year coming up, a re-election year coming up for Barack Obama in 2012. Mm-hmm. You may or may not want anybody to know what actually happened with this Clinton Bush Haiti fund, so you maybe delay filing it until the election.
Yeah.
Here, there are reports, in this case, to 50 states and Washington, D.C. Again, you investigators can get. And this firm, Mitchell & Titus, issues you see there, they issue October. I may have that wrong. 31 October, I guess.
So this date of letter says 31 September, should say 31 October 2012?
The Chucky made a mistake. Sorry.
That's okay. That's the first time I've ever seen that happen.
Yeah, that did happen. It happens from time to time. But you see, in 2012, again, she signs the 990 Anita Bott on 7 May 2013. They file forms in 50 states in Washington, D.C., but there's no audit for the final year that I've been able to find. Now, maybe there is one somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it yet. And that's extremely concerning.
And normally the audit is published on the website for you to be able to readily view it, correct?
Well, it depends. In this case, this thing only lasted for 4 years, and so it's now, 5 years gone? But there are records of it in various states. In New York State, there is no record, a key state, where Mitchell & Titus, I think, the office was located. They went after this thing. There's no filing in 2012, a key state, for no audit for 2012, where there should be one.
Right.
Yet, and again, we'll get into this in a bit, there is, in fact, a 990 for 2013 for this thing that you find on ProPublica that is false and materially misleading, as we'll get into when we talk about it in detail. So you don't have to pull any of these links up, but we provided for our viewers and listeners a profile of Anita Bott and her background. You find out that she was also involved with the Bush-Clinton-Katrina Fund, and she may have been involved with the Tsunami Fund. And it would be very interesting to understand her background and her connections. There's a very famous Indian politician with that last name. I don't know, it could be a common name in India, but that's a person. If I were an investigator, I hope you're listening. If I were an investigator, this is a person I would want to interview, because there are multiple touch points with this person in various of these Clinton Foundation, quote, charities. I'd also want to have some discussions with Mitchell & Titus, the accounting firm. And then I'd want to remember the stuff we've been talking about, how
Charles? Oh.
A fantastic book on... Huh?
Lost you there for a moment. You want to interview Anita Bott.
Yeah, Anita Bott, because she has various touch points with the various Clinton Foundation charities. I'd want to interview this Mitchell & Titus firm, the people there, and see what was in their accounting records. I want to interview the doyen of the charity bar law, Victoria Bjorklund. And there a link to her book, and her background is provided. And then I'd want to understand exactly what the Simpson-Thatcher review that started, as I say, in October, I think, 26th, 2011, as the books for the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund were coming together and many other entities were coming together, how extensive was her review? Did she consider all the international activities of the Clinton Foundation, or was she told not to do that? And if she didn't consider all of the activities, how could she possibly have rendered any meaningful advice to the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation about what should have happened?
Right.
So, with that as background, let's go step by step through this on the next slide.
Spotlight on 2009 financial results.
Right. As we've said, the Clinton Foundation operated in Haiti, in theory, beginning in 2003. Now, when you go on international charity sites to talk about, what's the situation in Haiti, people warn you against doing any work in Haiti because it's so corrupt. So I don't know what laws actually apply in Haiti for setting up a charity, but I can be pretty certain the Clinton Foundation didn't follow them. The 2009 financial results that were finalized and submitted in 2010 contain, this one here is the, we provide this concept of commenting on what are called subsequent events. So if you're writing an audit up for the year 2009 and something happens in 2010 through the date that you issue your audit for 2009, you're supposed to comment on all subsequent events after the end of December 31st, 2009. And it's got to be detailed, and the idea that you would have had this earthquake happen in January 2012, January 12, 2010, and that you would enter into a joint venture, a second joint venture with a charity related to the Bush family. There would be a lot of verbiage that should have been laid out, which is not in the Clinton Foundation 2009 annual report. In addition, as we talked about in the past, the Clinton Foundation statements for 2009 that are on their website on purpose, I would argue, do not include the combining financial statements for all the units, the largest one being that illegally organized HIV/AIDS thing that was overwhelmingly a majority both of the income statement in 2009, the revenues and expenses, and the cash on the balance sheet at the beginning and the end of the year. So that's all not there on the Clinton Foundation website, available, however, in the New York State Charity Bureau version and in the California version, so you can see what I'm talking about. Message to Eric Schneiderman and to the FBI, who should be looking into the New York State Attorney General and the Charity Bureau. In 2009, this illegally organized so-called Clinton Global Initiative University expanded its operations in 2009, according to the verbiage in the Clinton Foundation and the 990.
Foundation what?
But they didn't. University.
Sorry, Charles, we lost you there for a second. Yeah, I'm here.
So the Clinton Global Initiative University, remember that Eric Schneiderman rightly went after the Trump Foundation for operating a Trump university without registering in New York State the way you're supposed to register. Well, in 2009, the Clinton Global Initiative University expanded its operations according to verbiage in their annual report, in their 990. But A, the Clinton Global Initiative was not a lawfully organized charity. B, it did not register as a university. C, it was a joint venture in theory with Laureate, a private company at that point, that was a donor in theory to the Clinton Foundation, maybe of cash, maybe of non-cash items. None of these relationships, the joint venture agreement, nothing is on file in New York State where it should be. And we're talking here in the Clinton Global Initiative University and in the Global Initiative and in Laureate about large operations. So in 2009, the rumor was that, or the announcement was that Bill was going to be special UN envoy to Haiti in 2009. So 8 months or so before the earthquake. Now, why he would have been tapped for that work on the strength of his prior distributing adulterated AIDS medicine out of Ranbaxy into Haiti is beyond me, but nonetheless, that was announced. And then message to Pam Biondi, as we've talked about in the past, you need to get into your paperwork in Florida and understand why exactly the Clinton Foundation set something up in June called William J. Clinton Foundation Corporation as a domestic Florida entity, not as registering the parent in Florida. Why did you set up this funny, similar sounding name? That's a hallmark for fraud, having lots of charities that sort of sound the same, but this one located in a different state, maybe with different bank accounts, so that it's a means to get money routed that should go towards the main charity, routed towards this catchment device in Florida. Where are the bank records for that entity? Where are the reports for that entity? Who was monitoring that entity in Florida? What was happening?
Charles, apparently all of the office space on Ortel Place had been occupied because this is at 610 President Clinton Avenue.
Ortel Place?
I'm joking.
Yeah. So, again, in 2009, for people who are trying to think through, this Clinton Bush Foundation, how many blemishes did the Clinton Foundation have that should have been reported to the IRS as you're trying to create the Clinton Bush Haiti thing? The answer is lots. And a sweeping reorganization of the main foundation began by the 4th of September 2009. Now, we don't yet have all of the, quote, work-related emails and possibly work-related emails from January 21st, 2009 to September 4th, 2009. But message to Tom Fitton, message to the FBI, message to oversight committees in the House and the Senate, message to government authorities, those emails are very important. They would help us understand why it was that the Clinton Foundation decided to reorganize the HIV/AIDS thing when that was not called for in the Memorandum of Understanding. That would help explain, how much angst was expressed in these emails, either by people working inside the Clinton Foundation or by people working inside government, or both, or donors. A further thing to understand is that, though the Clinton Foundation, has done many, many things, even to this late date, they have not amended the parent company articles of incorporation to expand their purposes beyond the right to operate a library and a research center in Arkansas. And it makes you kind of feel that the people at the top understand that they are guilty as hell, and that the reason they haven't done this is that when you amend your articles of incorporation, you have to notify all the states, and in certain countries you would have to notify countries of this change. And if you only now modify your articles of incorporation, some bright bulb in one of the states, at least one of the foreign countries, is going to say, wait a minute, why are you amending this in 2018 when you've been doing all this other stuff since 2002? Why is it only now that you're amending it? So they didn't amend it in 2003.
Is that the Articles of Incorporation? No, that's, sorry.
Sorry?
No, I've got the wrong document there.
Now, I'm not hearing you, Jason. What was that?
Nothing. I had the wrong document. Can you hear me now, Charles?
Yeah, now I can.
One other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, Charles, of course, in addition to Judicial Watch, there's Freedom Watch, and I just did an interview the other day with Larry Klayman. Freedom Watch also obtains important documents from time to time, and I definitely want to get Larry on to Sunday with Charles as a guest for us someday in the near future. I think combining the information that you've got with the incredible law resources and experience that Larry has would be a super powerful combo. And I wonder if there's not ways that you guys could work together to bring justice to the Clintons. I really enjoyed that interview with Larry Klayman the other day.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So, as this all happened in 2009, the seeds were sown for exploitation of dangerous conflicts of interest. And we're at another time going to get into this whole Claudio Osorio matter, which is a sordid tale involving Republicans, Democrats, and Mr. Osorio is currently in prison. And there are others that looked at this whole mess and decided to try to exploit it to enhance their deals by accessing Clinton connections to get cash out of multilateral operations that were claiming to, in theory, do good in Haiti and other places. So if we go to the next page, we move into 2010. Now, why I'm going into this great depth? This is $50 million out of a $2.3 billion fraud is peanuts. and I wasn't going to focus on this until the Clinton team decided to make a real issue of Haiti, as they did on the 8th anniversary of Haiti, trying to talk about the words that came out of Donald Trump's mouth.
Allegedly.
We're talking about allegedly. We're talking about deeds here, and we're not talking about one trip to Haiti. We're talking about Cheryl Mills, who is, I think, an important person in Hillary's State Department, chief of staff or something, spending an inordinate amount of time in Haiti doing who knows what. And we're talking about a lot of missing work-related emails that might explain what deals were concocted in Haiti. We're talking about kids who may have starved in Haiti and people who may have been harmed by drugs in Haiti. We're talking about serious matters in Haiti, and we're talking about a bunch of people as bad as poverty is in the United States of America. There are very few places in America, if any, where anyone lives on $763 a year.
Yeah.
Okay, but on average, everyone in Haiti lives on $763 a year. So before you go around the world, not you, Jason, but before the Clintons go around the world taking credit for helping in Haiti, they should understand, that these are really vulnerable people, and you don't tread on vulnerable people. Now, after the earthquake, which occurred on the 12th of January 2010, immediately, the Clintons, and to a lesser extent, agents of the Bush family, began raising money without registering the Clinton-Bush entity anywhere, in any state, D.C., in Haiti, anywhere. Okay? This fund was not formed until the 28th of January 2010. So and its sole office, it was a Delaware corporation or Delaware nonprofit, with its sole office in Washington, D.C., which will become meaningful in a second. Now, the Clinton Foundation submitted 2 returns for 2010, where they incorrectly accounted for, in my view, and that's for a detailed discussion, but headline, they incorrectly accounted for their share of operations in Clinton-Bush Haiti. They didn't eliminate what are called consolidating adjustments. And they did it wrong once in 2011 for 2010, and then after a hue and cry was raised by people including me, they amended the return for 2010 and 2015, and again, failed to do it properly. So for the parent company, the largest expense of the parent company was a $37.1 million grant, 75% of the revenues of Clinton-Bush Haiti, $37.1 million. Say it was material at the Clinton Foundation level, in that that's a large expense, and it was material certainly at the Clinton-Bush level, 75% of revenues. In the return filed in 2011, listen up, prosecutors, particularly in Maryland, and Delaware and Washington, in the return filed in New York, the return filed in 2011, they claimed that they sent that $37.1 million in cash to a post office box 632454 in Baltimore, Maryland. Well, that's not a registered address. The Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund. I find no record of that anywhere. And they made that mistake again in 2015. They didn't change it. Same thing. Now, here's why this comes a bit close to home. And I, for the moment, am going to believe that the Obama family were actually acting out of the generosity of their hearts.
Sorry, Charles, you there?
Peace Prize.
Sorry, Charles, Let me back you up. The Obamas were acting out of the generosity of their own hearts, you said.
Yeah, they put a large percentage of the proceeds of the Nobel Peace Prize that they received, that was received by the Clinton Foundation by the 12th of April 2010, got to the Clinton Foundation before the Clinton-Bush Foundation was authorized as federally tax exempt.
It's almost as if they knew about this stuff beforehand and maybe somehow planned these things.
Well, no, I would argue that, for the Obamas, this is really something, maybe the statute of limitations is over on their personal tax returns, but if I were the Obamas, I would be cheesed off here. I mean, they were very careful, and there's a link that the viewers can see, The Obamas were very careful to make sure that their money went for program expenses in 2010. But as we showed you, out of the almost $50 million that went to the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund in 2010, 40 million was akin to profit. Only 10 million was spent on expenses. Mm-hmm. So, in the first instance, the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund did not follow the explicit wishes of the Obamas. In the second instance, the Obama money hit the Clinton Foundation by the 12th of April 2010 or thereabouts, approximately 16 days before the IRS granted authority for this thing to be a federally tax-exempt charity. So that's, on the nitty-gritty stuff, that's a problem.
So wait a minute, I'm confused. So it indicates what, that the Clintons tricked Obama, or that Obama was part of this?
No, I think to me, I think the Obama family was trying to be helpful, and maybe they didn't check carefully enough about the paperwork at the IRS. To me, it's more that the Clintons tricked the Obamas.
Clintons tricked the Obamas.
And then, in 2010, there's a glaring error here that Bill. We talked about the fact they didn't register the CGI University properly in New York State or anywhere, all the defects there. Bill Clinton took a contract, I think it was a multi-year contract, that gave him $17.6 million in cash for part-time work at Laureate, a joint venture partner of CGI University. That contract began May 2010. Unclear, because he hasn't disclosed it, whether it was a year-by-year thing or a long-term contract. If it was a long-term 5-year deal where he was entitled to $17.6 million, that should have been disclosed in every year, 2010 forward, of the Clinton Foundation, of the Clinton Global Initiative, and if there's Haiti projects in the Clinton Global Initiative, they should be disclosed in the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund. And $17.6 million for Bill Clinton personally over 5 years is 30% of the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund. So you could say, I'm selfless. I'm not doing any, I'm not taking any salary from the foundation. You don't have to take a salary from the foundation. You're taking it from a joint venture partner and you're not disclosing it. Are you listening, investigators in Maryland, in New York, in Washington, etc.? And you can't do what they actually did. Now,
apparently you can't.
Then you get to this thing of the, the grants, the paltry grant. A while back, which is, you take any entity connected to the Clinton Foundation, put it line, and I found Architecture for Humanity, once a California charity that got $816,000 from the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, and it was 14% of grants in 2010, but has been revealed as a fraud. Okay, how carefully? You only given away $7.7 million. How tough is it over the course of a year to study, the entities that you're going to give money to? You give money, $7.7 million. You keep husband $40 million in your cash coffers of the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund. Why were you doing that? Why did it take so long, to distribute the money that you had received in 2010? Why did you sit on that money while people were in their worst moments suffering in Haiti? It just doesn't make any sense.
Charles, I got another question for you, because this January 17th, 2015 New York Times article is talking about how this Architecture for Humanity is operating in places like Kosovo and Haiti. Now, we know the United Nations in 2014 accused doctors in Kosovo of human organ harvesting, and when I see a name like Architecture for Humanity, we know that so frequently there are these sort of clever, creative names. Could the Architecture for Humanity involve taking organs from some members of humanity and putting them in others?
Yeah, or it should more properly be called dissection of humanity.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just
shocking.
This is an area, I'm not generally in favor of regulation, but this is an area where, I think that if you're going to look at the IRS, you're going to look at the charitable department of the IRS, charities, U.S. charities that operate internationally, need to have extra resources thrown against them, both by federal IRS authorities, and in particular in high tax states like New York and California, Illinois, et cetera. These charities need to have special provisions and special restrictions that force them to account for their operations and have punitive penalties against donors, against executives, against trustees who use an international charity, a loosely controlled international charity, for personal enrichment. It shouldn't be that you just pay a small fine. You should pay like 5 times the value of what you extracted.
And interestingly enough, when I click on that Architecture for Humanity link within the New York Times article, the thing just keeps spinning and spinning. No page is coming up at Architecture.
We'll get to that because it was shut down.
Ah, see how you're several steps ahead of me.
Well,
and the Clintons.
So if we go to the next page,
yes,
an idea in accounting called the consistency principle, that you can't account for one collection of businesses in a radically different way in 2011, for example, than you did in 2010. So in 2010, when Clinton Bush Haiti was making money, when there were positive net assets, you include, I would argue, more than your share in the results. But in 2011, when it's losing money, you just don't contemplate it. That's something you can't do. That's something I think they did do. And in any event, they provide no ability in the original and or the amended. I provide here the amended 990 for 2011, amended in 2015. They provide no information. This is a confusing structure. If you hit on this next link, it's actually hysterical. When you set up multiple Clinton charities that have slightly similar names, here you find Beyonce went to Libya in 2011 before Hillary pounded Libya back into before the Stone Age.
And then laughed about it?
Well, no, she raised a whole bunch of money. I mean, she was paid a whole bunch of money to sing, I don't know, for a birthday party or something for Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And obviously people got cheesed off about that. So her defense was, well, I took the money and I gave it to the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund. Well, the problem is, on the dates in that article, if those are the dates she claims she gave the money, that Clinton Bush Haiti Fund was not a charity on those dates.
Ooh. No, I meant it was Hillary who was laughing about destroying Libya. But yeah, this is March 2011, this Rolling Stone article came out. And,
but look at the date she sent the money.
2009, Beyonce performed 5 songs in a black leotard at a private New Year's Eve party, 2009, for Muammar Gaddafi.
So she should have declared that as income in 2009. And I don't know if Libya was a state where you're supposed to earn money. It was on the OFAC list then. But
right.
Look at the date when she said.
Well, it says in 2008. Oh, that's Mariah Carey. Yeah, well, people can certainly look through this document and read it in detail. This is one of the things that'll be included in the links that get shared at the end of the program.
So then you go through and you know, there's another article, Rolling Stone, the third link there, that lack of progress. And they're focusing more, I think, on the UN money because that's big money. But even the Haiti Fund is not really that much money by the end of 2011. They raised $50 million, they claim up front, but they don't really spend that much money. And you got to ask yourself, if you're so well stuck into Haiti, if you're having such difficulty deploying the money, why?
Losing you there a bit, Charles. I'm going to kill my video on the Skype call just to try to improve our bandwidth here. Can you hear me? Charles, have I got you? Oh, Charles, can you hear me? You got me? Sorry about that, Charles. Let's see. What do we got going here? Can you hear me, Charles? Totally frozen. Should not be the case. Charles, I'm going to try calling you right back if that's all right. Let's just see if I can get Charles back on the line. Apologize, everyone. Sometimes when traveling, internet connectivity is a bit of an issue.
You there?
I am. Have you got me?
I can see. Yep.
There we go. We're back. Sorry about that, Charles.
It's okay.
And you were saying? Frozen again. Not good, not good.
Can you hear me
Charles?
now?
Yes, I've got you. Please proceed.
In the
Oh, Charles, I'm sorry. We're having some problems. If I kill my video, perhaps. Charles, if you can hear me, maybe if you switch to audio only, this will work better. I'm not sure what just changed. We should have good throughput. Yep, there you go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed. I think what we should do maybe, Charles, is if you kill your video, we can proceed. And I'm not sure what happened with the bandwidth there, but nothing has changed
We just treat it as a phone call, you mean?
Yes, I think that might, people will be sad to not see your smiling face, but I think we can get through the slides a little bit more quickly.
All right, I'll tell you what.
I don't know, we just got flattened for some reason, Charles. I can't hear you.
Are you?
Try you one more time.
I can. Oh.
Okay, let's try this. We'll just do audio only. Are you there? Oh, Charles, I'm so sorry. I got one more thing to try. Bear with me, please, everyone. Just dealing with some traveling issues. Should be ringing. We're going to be back momentarily here on Sunday with Charles. Just trying to get Charles back on the line. We've been discussing the Clintons' activities in Haiti. I'm going to try Charles one more time.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've got you there. All right.
Sorry. So it's the real multimedia affair.
Yes, I apologize. You know, it's always hit or miss when we try to do these remote setups, but I think we should be able to proceed without a problem here. Where were you there, Charles?
Good. All right. So what I was saying is, rather than using directly controlled personnel, what the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund seems to have done is to outsource efforts that they undertook in 2011. And you got to ask yourself, why did they give 20% of the domestic grants to an affiliate of the Organization of American States to do the work? Why did they give a further 19% to Partners in Health, 17% to Technoserve, 11% to this entity called Root Capital, which to me does not sound like a real charity. Sounds
Root
like
Capital
a hybrid.
Sounds like a hedge fund, no?
Yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, it seems to be like a hybrid, and it doesn't seem to be run properly. And then, how could the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund have operated in Haiti without any local bank accounts? I mean, that's what they declare on their fund. They have no international bank accounts. That seems very suspicious.
Indeed.
And they did not, none of these charities declared any
declare or regulate any of the conflicts of interest during 2011. These are all very problematic. And they continue the pattern in 2012. They don't consolidate the losses of the Clinton-Bush-Haiti Fund into 2012 consolidated financial statements. And here, suddenly they're giving 28% of their domestic grants to, the organization or the overseas private investment corporations. If you're going to give 28%, more than a quarter of your grants to OPIC, why'd you set the damn thing up anyway? And they give almost a quarter to the Clinton Foundation. They give it to, they palm something up. They say, well, we gave $2 million to our, quote, UN office. No address, no explanation of what that office actually is. They give more than 10% to Sean Penn's charity, which in another presentation, we're going to do one on celebrity charities and how they go wrong. But this thing is hopeless. They give 3%, again, to this fraudulent architecture for humanity, and they gave 2% to Cornell University for some reason. Now, you remember that Bob Harrison, the CEO of the Clinton Global Initiative, was the chairman of the board of Cornell. So there should be some explanation about, in Clinton Global Initiative books, Clinton Foundation books, Clinton Bush-Haiti, of this relationship, and was it proper, and why were you giving money, the Clinton Bush-Haiti Fund, to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York?
That's a good question.
Now, in theory, this Clinton Bush-Haiti entity, it completed operations by the 31st of December 2012. In a letter in New York State, I think they say they ceased operations on the 22nd of December 2012. Well, how come the state governments of high-tax states like New York and Canada and California refuse to investigate and prosecute these Clinton charities? Why do they refuse to do it? There's so many obvious infractions. Then you turn to 2013. Now, we've talked in the past about how it's very important when you liquidate a charity, you got to fill out something called Schedule N. Schedule N requires you in detail to list out the precise dates of money transfers that went out of the Clinton Bush-Haiti Fund to whom? The amount, the date, what was it, what was the reason. And what you see here is that in 2013, all these dates are in 2013, 11.5 million of the remaining cash of the Clinton Bush-Haiti Fund, in theory, went to the Inter-American Development Bank and the Inter-American Investment Corporation.
Now, Charles, let me interrupt for a moment, because wasn't Inter-America the group that Imran Awan entered the United States through? He was working for Inter-America.
Inter-American, plural, or?
I'm not sure. Were they related? It just immediately struck me when you mentioned it.
Could be. And then you see here 2.5 million to the Clinton Foundation in 2013, and 2 million again in 2013 to UN Ops, whatever that is. 738,000 to a law firm, Kaplan Drysdale, and 187,000 to the Cornell Hospital, the Weill Cornell Hospital. I mean, what were they doing distributing 16.9 million in 2013 to these entities? It seems to have nothing to do with Haiti, and it seems to be far outside the charter. And by the way, in 2013, the Clinton Foundation was in diabolical shape. And where are the agreements that should exist, the dissolution agreements that, when the thing was terminated, why weren't those dissolution agreements filed explaining how this money would have gone up to these these various entities? None of this stuff was there yet. And, remember, when I talk about these numbers, remember that Corinne Brown is about to report to jail. We should have one of those tick-tock clocks again. 29th of January for only $800,000. Think about how much of this money could have gone missing. And again, remember, there's no audit that I've been able to find yet for 2012 and 13 by an independent, competent party cross-checking any of it.
Right.
So if we go, and we're going to be, I think, taking this in record time, but we're now in a place where Chelsea Clinton, and you notice I put her name Chelsea in green, Clinton is in automatic red. She has some tough decisions to make. I mean, undoubtedly, she's loyal to her parents. If Al Capone had kids, I'm sure that Al Capone's kids thought he was great. Yeah, but this is a person who's highly educated. I have behind me one of her books about governing global health. Harvard University, to its fault, has praised the Clintons, honoring the Clintons, even though I would argue they've been operating the world's largest unprosecuted set of charity frauds in history. The Clinton charities are not the only ones that seem to me to be vulnerable. Chelsea was the directress, that link shows, of Partners in Health. And so her conflicts of interest between the Clinton Health Access Initiative, the Clinton Foundation, and Partners in Health are not explained and need to be explained, but of course they're not. The attacks by Chelsea against President Trump concerning Haiti seem to me to be, very unwise, given what we've just been through, which is really the tip of the iceberg. You wouldn't need more than what we've gone through to decide that there needs to be serious investigation and prosecution just for the Clinton-Bush Haiti fund. And Chelsea has to know better. That's a link. We haven't talked so much about the Secretary of State emails, but that's a link, if it works, to an email by Chelsea back up to her parents saying, basically, I've been to Haiti and it's a disaster. And I think that was in 2010 or 11 when she was there. And, to be fair to her, she saw the problems. She saw it was tough, I would argue, to deal with her father and mother's cronies. So she got Braverman in to the Clinton Foundation. And, he tried and failed to make a difference there. And so what Chelsea should be wondering, and what others at the Clinton Foundation should be wondering, is how long has Eric Braverman, if he has been, how long has he been cooperating with the government authorities? But,
we certainly know, Charles, that Eric Braverman went to the FBI. There was a True Pundit article way back when about Eric Braverman, going to the FBI, Eric Braverman attempting to leak information about what he knew about some of the various frauds that you've been describing, and then him kind of going to the Russian embassy to ostensibly escape the reaches of the Clinton Foundation, and then he went missing for many, many months.
Yeah. So, Chelsea may not care about money, which she said. She can't be bothered to make money. But she should care about fraud. Particularly yes. With her do-gooder globalist friends. She really should care about it. And if she's in a place, where she's thinking about, do I go down with the Titanic, the mother and father Titanic, or do I, develop a spine and say, no, Mom and Dad, I have to live with this after you're gone. I'm not going to go down with the Titanic. She's at that place. She's in a time for choosing, in my opinion. As these prosecutors, as the FBI, as governments around the world close in and advance their investigation, she will not be able to say, as a PhD in health, and I think she has various degrees in health, that she didn't understand the potential for mayhem with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, on whose board she has served, or with the Clinton Foundation. And she won't be able to say, having brought in one of the world's leading firms, Simpson Thacher, to study this thing, that she wasn't told there were serious problems, including that a public charity cannot be controlled by one family, as this thing has been, the main one, since the 2nd of November 2013, without disclosing that around the world, as they should have in various states. And she will not credibly be able to say that she didn't understand that a public charity cannot create more than an insubstantial, i.e. less than $1,000 collectively over its life, private gain. She won't be able to get away with that.
Right.
So, if we're almost done, we've got 2 slides yet to go, and with luck, we'll be able to complete this in record time. What has been happening in the last several moments, indeed, I put the slide together minutes before we got on air. It appears that the Judiciary Chair, Bob Goodlatte, is in fact getting some of the fruits of the Inspector General of the Justice Department, Horowitz's report, and it's rumored that that's 1.2 million pages.
Wow.
So a lot there. And what he's been studying, apparently, is the degree to which the Justice Department, maybe the FBI and others, might have been subverted in the 2015-16 timeframe when decisions began to get made about who was going to run for office in both parties, who in the Democratic Party might be the presidential standard bearer, what was going on with the mishandling of classified information investigation that began the 10th of July 2015 into Hillary Clinton and Ullah Bedin and others. That information apparently started going to the House Judiciary Chair this most recent Friday. My sense is that the Intelligence Chair, Devin Nunes, who was attacked for questioning, for bringing to light the fact that Donald Trump may indeed have been wiretapped and other issues, he, I think, will be vindicated. Tom Fitton's Judicial Watch, as always, is being relentless, but is making success against these Obama, Bush, Clinton holdovers in various departments, getting information about emails and other things. And what we're going to find, I hope, is that the investigators that have been tapped here to do this work will be successful using their subpoena power, following the trails that have been starting, going back over ground the IRS should have been prosecuting, and we will begin to see the benefit of all this. Meanwhile, we've got to understand what really happened with that Steele dossier. The public has an absolute right to know. The Wall Street Journal is calling for us all to be able to read it, even if it's salacious. And, we need to understand in this country, and I've laid out in my most recent piece in Life Set, which came out, I think, Friday, big donors, directors, executives, and public servants are not above the law. And the big donors, the Gates Foundation, big government donors like the government of France, Australia, other places, they've got to understand that they, by supporting this fraud over almost 2 decades in some cases, they are partially responsible. And they've got to do right, particularly by the people of Haiti. So meanwhile, we've got Representative Corinne Brown poised to enter prison just 15 days. She is somebody who is, a little bit older than Hillary. I think she's 71. I told you, Jason, that quote about how do you go bankrupt 2 ways, gradually then suddenly.
Right.
That's indeed from Ernest Hemingway in The Sun Also Rises. I forget where The Sun Also Rises was set, but I think it was set, if not in Florida or Cuba, somewhere near Haiti. And it's important that people understand, just because the Clintons have been able to resist investigation, resist prosecution, does not mean that they're going to get away with the largest unprosecuted fraud in world history. So we close. This is a setup for discussion that we're going to have here in coming weeks and months. But before we get into this, it's important for the audience to understand that I am not saying all of these people were murdered. Suicides do indeed happen. And they're very sad. It's a tragic thing. But when you look, and this is not the long list of, the so-called Clinton body count. This is just a list of some of the more recent suspicious ones that I think it behooves investigators to go back over. In particular, we start with one that's a little dated, on or after the 28th of January 2008. So just around the time that Hillary Clinton was beginning to not do so well originally, or at all, in the contest to the joint venture entity that was the contracting firm for the Clinton Foundation disappeared on the 28th of January 2008, subsequently to be found, his remains found under suspicious circumstances. And I think when the FBI and the U.S. Attorney, if they decide to do it, go back in to the period 2001 to 4 and 5 in particular, and look closely at the fraudulent documents that I think have been hidden on the Clinton Foundation website, but submitted to states and federal and international governments, they may begin to understand the rationale for people to want this John Glasgow dead. And so I think, he had a reputation for asking tough questions, for being a straight shooter. I see abundant evidence of fraud in the 2000 to 2004 timeframe in particular. Of course, it escalates from 5 afterwards to 2009 and afterwards. There's a suspicious death of this UN guy. Some say he choked under a large barbell moments before, in theory, he may have been supposed to testify. And that's in 22 June 2016. Then there's Seth Rich, my friend Peter Smith the following year, prosecutor down in Florida, the Haiti person more recently, and then this couple, Barry and Honey Sherman in Canada, billionaires supposedly, who may or may not have been under financial difficulty. They were doing work, in theory, with the Clinton Foundation in Haiti in 2014. But how did the Clinton Foundation have any authority to work in Haiti in 2014? When the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund was gone, I see no evidence in the articles that they had any authority at that time frame. So one moral for me for all this is that unregulated globalism does not put any Americans above our laws. And I think it is high time for our federal authorities, our state authorities, and our IRS to do the work they should have done long ago to unpack the truth about what happened, what really happened from the 23rd of October, 1997, right the way through, to expose that truth to grand juries, to obtain indictment, to seek and win conviction, and then to punish all who would oppose this investigation and all who would oppose the exposition of truth here to the fullest extent of the law, every bit as harshly as Corinne Brown is now being punished, if not more harshly. And
I would hope so.
With that, we come in under 2 hours.
Amazing, Charles. Charles, one thing I wanted to ask you, in my conversation with Larry Klayman, I asked him specifically if he felt, because every time, you and I do the show and you present the evidence that you present, I get this feeling that, things are moving closer and closer towards some kind of prosecution of the Clintons. But Larry said that he felt within the context of the courts and the law that nothing would happen to the Clintons. What can you say about that?
I think it's important. Look, this is not easy. But on the other hand, I think it's an imperative. What an easy ask for Donald Trump probably to do what he did and decide to take on the swamp in the way he did, to take on the Republicans, then take on the Clinton machine, the Democrats, now to take on the resistance movement. That wasn't an easy ask. But in order to make progress, in order to disrupt this bureaucracy, this criminal enterprise for the better, what better way than to make an example of the people still involved, with this Clinton Foundation fraud, obstructing it, funding it, taking credit for it. What better way than to make an example of these people? Right. And I think if you land hard enough on somebody like the chief financial officer, Andrew Kessel, or Bruce Lindsay, or Anita Bott, or the many young people who got involved in this starry-eyed, thinking that it was really a force for good, and then either left, like Eric Braverman, without standing up and facing these people down. There are enough of you battered people, battered by these Clintons, who owe the people of Haiti and the people of Papua New Guinea and the people of India and the people of Africa. You owe them, and you owe the people who are going to come after us to man up and woman up, or as that lady McSally who's running for senator in Arizona, grow a pair of ovaries and, stand up and do the right thing. Have a Spike Lee moment and say, we're better than this. As Barack Obama likes to say, these are not our values, and we are better than this. Just because this was a former president, just because it was an aspiring president, just because they're marquee name celebrities, does not mean that they should be able to get away with it. And for many reasons, I really think and hope that the prosecutors who may be listening to this, the FBI, foreign government authorities, will finally stand up, pull the switches that you can pull, particularly in countries like France and the UK, Australia, Norway, Sweden, Korea, the many countries around the world where you can move peremptorily to ask the kind of tough questions, to regulate the donors, to regulate the accounting firms. You can help. And to the U.S. Attorney Carter Highland in Little Rock, who may be on this case, with the people in the Little Rock office of the FBI, to the field offices of the FBI, thank you for what you're trying to do. It's time to shut this thing down, to appoint a conservator, to stop them from fundraising, to force the conservator to make a real accounting, to put pressure on the accounting firms, the Mitchell and Titus in the case of CDHF, BKD, Price Waterhouse, Cohen, Resnick. There are many firms you can land on, just as you landed on Arthur Andersen, and make an example of this. Charity fraud is horrific.
Absolutely. Well, Charles, with that, I think we will say good afternoon to everyone, and we will be back, of course, next week. Was there anything else you wanted to share with us before we go?
Other than to say thank you so much, and I guess you can't put a link up for Crowdsource the Truth and stuff, but you might want to say something about that.
Well, of course, and I want to thank you, Charles, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. It's always interesting how we relocate the show all the time, and every new hotel presents its new technical challenges. But I do want to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource, and I do enjoy traveling around to get to firsthand testimony of people like the Bundys and people like Larry Klayman, and doing all the on-the-ground work that we're doing. And of course, we want to avoid the pitfalls of these corporate-owned, advertiser-driven large news agencies, and so we rely on the crowdsourced community both for leads and information, but also for financial sponsorship. So if you're watching the show weekly or daily and you're not yet a sponsor, we've just passed 42,000 regular subscribers on YouTube. If you're watching daily, I hope you'll consider going to patreon.com, and for something between $1 and $5 a month, become a monthly sponsor at patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or consider making a one-time sponsorship payment at paypal.me crowdsource the truth. And as Charles mentioned, of course, cryptocurrency is an exciting area. We're going to continue looking into the details of cryptocurrency, and the links for Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and all of those things are available in the description box for each of these videos. The link to Charles's PDF presentation will be coming up shortly after the stream wraps. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank Charles for sticking through the technical difficulties, and just as no matter how many obstructions get in our way, Charles, we will batter them down, whether it's slow internet, if we have to rely on voice only, we will get this message out. I will see you next week back in New York. Thank you so much, Charles, for everything that you're doing, and thank you for a great show again today.
All right, safe travels home, Jason. Thanks.
Very well. See you soon, Charles, and I'll see everybody soon. Thanks very much for watching.